Welcome to the music show, Neneh.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
An awful lot has been made, and probably not too much has been made of your early years and the huge and clearly formative experiences you had hanging around with everybody from the Slits to Miles Davis. I mean, how could you not be affected by this and the fact that you were working, from the age of 14, really, in the business? You were shuttling between Sweden and New York City.
Yeah.
Between your mum and your stepfather, the great jazz trumpeter Don Cherry.
Yeah, it was not between them, but they were kind of living in both places.
Yeah.
I think Don came to Stockholm before I was born. I think my mother was pregnant with me when they first met. And he came, I think, with Sonny Rollins and met my mother, and they just kind of had a bit of a vibe. Then he came back after I was born. And that's kind of when they got together. And then he decided really that he wanted to spend time in Europe. I think he'd been in Paris and other places. So first of all, he came to live in Stockholm. And I was born in 66. So in 64, we went to live in New York for the first time in Williamsburg. And actually my first memories are kind of in there somewhere, probably from the extreme contrast between Stockholm and New York. And then we kept doing this thing where we would kind of migrate or live between the two places, so we would go 6 months to New York and then go back to Sweden. In 1970, my parents bought a schoolhouse in southern Sweden. We still have that. That's the kind of family foundation, the heartbeat of the family resides there. And they kind of moved out there to very much do the green thing. It was the early 70s. So they wanted to do their own, grow their own food and,
This is very different from New York.
Very different from New York, but it kind of became like a normality also. And I mean, thank God in a way, because even though I love Tågarp, the place in southern Sweden, so much, because so little changes there, it just is, and there's something very valuable to have a place like that on the planet where the trees grow, but the vibe's kind of the same. But then, of course, going to New York was like really important because everything happened there. And we were exposed to everything, saw all kinds of things and all kinds of people and music and sounds and culture. And I think also being so different from everybody else, being the only black kid in my school and living in a really tiny community, I found so many other bits of my making in New York.
There's a clear connection, it seems to me, between what Don Cherry was doing and what you were doing with The Thing not very long ago on that album, The Cherry Thing, which is essentially the same sort of area of work, isn't it?
But that record was like such an important record, actually, for me to make, because it was a very forceful experience. It was also a very interesting experience because I remembered who I was, and working in such an experimental way, but also in such a familiar way, because it was such a big part of my heritage that I think I hadn't really tapped into, maybe not since Rip Rig and Panic days, which was the first band that I actually joined when I moved to London. I mean, I worked a little bit with the Slits, but the Rip Rig and Panic was really the first group I was in. And of course, they were big jazz fans. So I kind of instinctively went into my roots because I didn't really know what the hell I was doing. You know what I mean? So it's just like, I'll just draw from stuff that I'm carrying around somewhere in my spine. But I think that with the Thing record, having not made a record for so long, I mean, I'd been on records, but kind of not really been in the centerfold of making a record. It was, thank God, that I made that record that was so free form, because I didn't have time, in a way, to overanalyze or overthink what I was doing. It was just about doing. And I don't think that the record that we're looking at here, Blank Project, would have happened in the way that it did if it wasn't for the Cherry thing, because it just made sense of a lot of things that were sort of like question marks, maybe.
Yes. People knew your name in a big way initially from Raw Like Sushi. But listening to those songs now, Buffalo Stance and Man-Child and so on, I mean, listening to the new things and knowing where you came from, it's almost like that hit album was a kind of aberration. It's not really what you do most of the time in your life, is it?
No, I mean, yes, it was a part of what I do, and it was part of the time that I was in when that record was made. And I think that's the story of albums and work that we all do, depending on what you do, is that it tells a story of where you were in that time. And that was very much where I was. And a lot of the stories and the lyrics and the vibe of that record is a kind of synopsis of where I'd been as a teenager. I was 25 when I made the record, and where I was then. But, I think, like, when I went to make Homebrew, it was like I really wasn't that interested in sort of going, what is he like, anymore. I needed to go resonate into some other stuff that was looking further and a little bit deeper. I mean, Cameron, my husband, was working on Blue Lions, the Massive Attack record, and they were kind of living in our house and sleeping on the floor and recording the tracks that became Blue Lions. And, hearing what they were doing was a huge medicinal part of what helped me find my way through Homebrew. But I think, it wasn't a place I was going to stay in. I mean, I like to listen to people's music, not only, but I like it when I feel like, oh God, I'm interested in what they're going to be doing when they're like 80. Do you know what I mean? And I think that that's always been, I've always felt that like maybe like around now, when I was 25, I was hoping that when I would be like around 50 or whatever, that I'd just be like getting there. And that's the kind of how I feel. Like I'm just starting in a way.
Well,
and that's a cool feeling.
And I can understand why you feel that as well, because the music seems to bear it out, because it takes you back. I mean, this new album and the Cherry thing from a couple of years ago seems to me to take you back to Aria.
I feel that, like, she's with me.
Yeah. Because, I mean, what a fantastic voice.
Ari.
Yeah, and the way she used it. She was singing with the slits.
She was really something. She was an amazing woman, absolutely one-off, but a kind of a musical genius. And it's funny, I was listening to the slits. I listen to them all the time, but I was listening to the album a while ago and a few weeks ago, like the whole album. I was like, wow, this is a Cut, which was their first record. I was like, this is a very avant-garde record, which is probably why they really got into jazz. I mean, Ari introduced me also to reggae music, and I started going to sound systems and stuff with her in London, which is big thing in my life. And it's interesting actually because Björk, to me, always reminded me of Ari, and I always used to ask her. And this is like, I love Björk, so don't get me wrong, but I used to be like, the slits, right? You've listened to Ari, haven't you? Like, she's amazing. And I always feel that I can hear her in your voice. And she would always sort of go like, oh, I don't know. I've never really listened to them. And then one night when she was really drunk, actually, no. But I think that somewhere along the line, she sort of felt, I think she knew what I meant. Like a spirit, they have a sisterhood, those two. And, women like Ari, of course, and, listening to Polystyrene from X-Ray Specs, and I always kind of check them, were women that helped me find the way. They were my gurus in a way. Other women as well, but I think, the way that, like, for instance, the Slits took me in, and I was a sort of the funny little sister that kind of joined the band in the late days and played a bit of percussion and danced with Ari and stuff. I was looking at a clip that my daughter sent me of us dancing together at a gig in Berlin, and it was just like, oh my God. And, you know, I was only 16, and, you know, Ari was only a couple of years older, but I mean, she'd been out. The Slits she was 14 when she formed
She was
the
very
Slits.
much a role model for you, really.
Huge
wasn't
role
she?
model.
Yeah. And even with the European background.
Yeah.
It's been a huge pleasure to meet you, Neneh Cherry. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much
for coming on
it was really nice.
today's show.